Thank you, Father, and welcome everybody. I want to thank Father for allowing the HEPA Chapter 98 to participate in the wonderful mustard seed program. Most are familiar faces for these lectures and presentations, and I'm glad you all decided to come out on a cold February night. Those of a certain age remember this magazine cover from Life magazine, one of the first national images of the Greek Orthodox Church on a national stage and dealing with a national issue. And for the last year, our chapter has been talking about how we can commemorate the 50th anniversary of the March on Selma and Archbishop Yakov's participation in it. And tonight is the culmination of this. And I want to thank you all for coming, and I want to turn this over to Theo Nikolakis.
Thanks, Gene. Good evening, everybody. It's, as Gene said, really a pleasure to be able to have everybody here this evening for a really unique lecture and perspective. Gene asked me if I'd be willing to introduce Father Nathanael, who's our featured speaker this evening. And before I do so, I think it's appropriate to reiterate what Gene said and really to thank the local HEPA chapter here at St. Barbara for sponsoring this evening's event. I think you're going to leave enlightened with some of the things Father Nathanael's going to say, and it goes without saying to also thank our President Gina Saris and Greg Stamus for their leadership in spearheading things this evening. This evening's speaker is a dear friend, colleague, and schoolmate, Father Nathanael Symeonides, who has served as deacon to His Eminence Archbishop Demetrius, but has really made a name for himself among his various positions. He's among the youngest individuals ever appointed to serve as the Ecumenical Officer for the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America, and in that capacity he is responsible for representing the person of His Eminence Archbishop Demetrius, as well as the Archdiocese of America, in all official capacities related to ecumenical and interfaith affairs for the Archdiocese nationally. He was intimately involved in the visit of Pope Francis to Jerusalem to meet His All Holiness Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew for the 50th anniversary of that great event that happened this past year. And when the anniversary celebrations came up for the commemoration of Archbishop Yakubos at Selma, Alabama, it was Father Nathanael personally and his office that rose to the occasion that said, we are going to spearhead an effort to try to commemorate this event on behalf of the Archdiocese. And really, under Father Nathanael's leadership for the past several months, the Ecumenical Office, galvanizing all the different departments of the Archdiocese together, has undergone this incredible effort that's culminated in this vast ongoing resource initiative that he will talk about also online, that has gathered together a sweeping historical overview. So he's a PhD, he has his doctoral degree from Boston University, and without further ado, I want to introduce my dear friend, colleague, and someone that you're going to grow to admire the next hour, Father Nathanael Symeonides.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Theo, for that introduction. He said I'm the youngest person to hold this office, and the way things are going, this will be the last time they appoint someone this young to that office. Because the young generation, have new ideas. I'd like to push the envelope a little bit, and sometimes we push a little too much, and we end up shoving people. So we try, we'll do our best this evening, not to say anything that gets me into trouble. And as Father said, to pray, forgot to take away idle talk from my mouth. I do want to thank Father Peter, a good brother and someone that I've looked up to for many, many years as a layman. I knew him as a young boy at my parish in Zodokospii. Father Peter, his entire family, actually, the entire Farnakos family, has been sort of an extended family for me. And so I thank you, Father, for inviting me to this beautiful church. of St. Barbara's, and I noticed the beautiful ministries you have here. You have an entire book with all your ministries, which is incredible. So thank you, Father. I also want to thank again Theo Nikolakis, my good friend and brother, for all he does at the Archdiocese to help all of us work together. He is the interlocutor, I would say, in many ways. He helps connect all of us. And I also want to thank the Ehepans, what is it, chapter 98? And Greg Stamos and Jean Saros. I've been working with the Ehepans on this celebration, the 50th anniversary of the March on Selma now, for a couple of months. They've been reaching out to me. I haven't been that good at responding at times, and I apologize, but the people on the ground in Selma have been, in Alabama, have been doing a great job helping us organize our community on the ground. So I thank you all for that. This evening, what I wanted to do, as we know, there's a movie that's out called Selma. Many of you have probably seen it. If you haven't seen it, it's worth seeing. It's worth seeing in the movie theater, and it's worth buying as a DVD or downloading and watching with family members and friends. It's very well done. And in that movie, if you notice, there's at one point a gentleman, a clergyman, a bishop who appears in Selma, Alabama, wearing his black robes, his black veil, holding a staff, and he looks very familiar to us, and of course he looks like Archbishop Iakovos. And the producer, the executive, the director of the movie knew well enough as they were researching history to know who was there, what was going on, did not miss including Archbishop Iakovos in the movie. And he's there for a few moments. He actually has a speaking part. But in his person, our entire community was represented in Selma. What I'll do tonight is I'm going to read a very, very, very brief summary of exactly kind of what went on there, the role of the Orthodox Church in general. Elaborate a little bit on this. This piece was written by Father Michael Varlamos, and it's a full history is found on our website, which Theo had up a little while ago. And I'll talk to you about this new resource for everyone to go and look at. But then what I want to do is talk to everyone about how did we get to Selma in 1965? Did the Orthodox Church, did Archbishop Iakovos somehow magically or suddenly wake up and say there's I'm just going to go down there? Or what was guiding his actions? What was there in our church and our faith that made what he did resonate with Christendom? And what I'll do is we'll start looking at kind of the history of freedom, the history of love for our neighbor, the history of equality from the time of creation, and we'll get up to Selma and today. So please allow me a few moments to read this brief summary of the Civil Rights Movement, Selma 1965, by Father Michael Varlamos. In response to a nationwide call by the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., religious and civic leaders from across the country gathered in Selma, Alabama, on March 15, 1965, to memorialize two recently fallen heroes of the Civil Rights Movement, Deacon Jimmy Lee Jackson and Reverend James Reeb. Among the dignitaries who arrived in Selma that day was His Eminence Archbishop Iakovos of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of North and South America. I recall at the time it was the Archdiocese of North and South America. As Dr. King concluded his eulogy in the Brown Chapel, they prepared for the long-awaited march to the courthouse. Dr. King led the march with Archbishop Iakovos on his side, on one side, and Reverend Ralph Abernathy and Ambassador Andrew Young on the other. As we walked toward the courthouse, there were so many ugly faces staring at us, Archbishop Iakovos told a New York Times reporter. The white spirits were so poisoned by hate and bias. But when you believe in the rightness of what you're doing, you discount fear. That was something that the Archbishop said to the reporters. Soon after the march, His Eminence issued a statement to the press that read in part, "I came to this memorial service because I believe this is an appropriate occasion, not only to dedicate myself as well as our Greek Orthodox communicants to the noble cause for which our friend, the Reverend James Reed, gave his life, but also in order to show our willingness to continue this fight against prejudice, bias, and persecution." The entire statement can be found on that website that you'll see after our discussion. That same evening, due to the peaceful March demonstrations, President Lyndon Johnson introduced his voting rights bill to Congress. The next day, Archbishop Iakovos reflected on CBS's The World Tonight, and he said, "The commitment that our President made before our nation last night renews the faith of our people in equality, democracy, and human dignity. Many scholars and historians consider the events that transpired in Selma that year the crowning moment of the civil rights movement. Archbishop Iakovos knew that voting did more than give people a voice in their government. Voting erased their invisibility. Archbishop Iakovos labored tirelessly for almost 4 decades on human and civil rights causes for all peoples, along with his dear friend Dr. Martin Luther King, earning him the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1980 from President Jimmy Carter." And he closes, Father Varlamos closes with, "The Greek Orthodox Church continues to fight against racism, prejudice, and discrimination with fervent love for God and all people." And Father Varlamos is a unique person. He is working on his PhD on this very issue, on the civil rights movement and Archbishop Iakovos in the Orthodox Church. So he will write one day an entire book. So this was just his way of introducing exactly what was going on at the time, why the Archbishop went down there. If you see the Selma movie, you would think that the Archbishop was down there and kind of, they conflate a lot of the different historical moments. But the Archbishop went down there because 2 men died. 2 clergymen were killed during this peaceful demonstration. And he went down there representing the National Council of Churches. And as the president of the National Council of Churches, the Archbishop was the highest ranking clergyman in Selma that day. Okay, and this is why the Archbishop was placed in a place of honor next to Martin Luther King. He was also invited to go down, and Teo has some video footage of the late Coretta King, who actually talks about the concern that Martin Luther King had about who do they invite, who do they call to come down and support their effort. And one of the persons that they reached out to, they recognized the Archbishop as being a key ally in the fight for equal voting rights. But let's now look to the past. Okay, let's put Selma in brackets. Okay, and what I'd like to do is to kind of focus on what went on at the very, very beginning, at creation, and look at the principles that are found within each and every human being that made this cause praiseworthy, righteous, and really a mandate for the Archbishop and for us today. We know that in the beginning, God creates the world out of nothing. Okay? He creates all the living creatures and then begins to create man. He creates Adam and he creates Eve. He creates Adam for the earth, and he takes a rib from Adam in one of the creation stories and creates Eve and calls her woman. Calls Adam man and Eve woman. Isha, I think that's the Hebrew. And although they were different, although one was man, one was woman, God creates them in that same image and likeness. They were different. There was diversity in creation. And yet there was equality. They were on the same level in spite of being different, in spite of their difference in sex. They were created in the image and likeness of God. And together, they were able to be in communion with God. This same principle, the image of God, the Imago Dei, is found in every single person. And the fathers of the church often, when interpreting what this image of God means, what does it mean to be created in the image of God? Did God take a mirror and kind of draw us or create us to look like Him? What is the image? And Basil the Great and many of the great fathers of the church interpret the image of God to mean freedom, the ability to choose, good or evil. And that was something that Adam and Eve had. That's what made them equal. They could both choose to embrace God, to obey the commandments, or to disobey God. We know how the story goes. They disobeyed the commandments and eventually this past Sunday, Cheese Fair Sunday, is the commemoration of the exile of Adam and Eve from paradise. And in spite of their exile, they still maintain that image. They haven't lost the image. And each of us still maintains that image of God. We are born, we are created with that freedom. The history of Israel now, if we look at the Old Testament, is the history of salvation. And the Old Testament has mostly to do with this one race, this one people, Israel. And God sends to them a law. God sends to them prophets. God sends to them angels and messengers to help them along their way, until the moment when God finally sends His only begotten Son, our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. And Jesus Christ finds 12 disciples, teaches them, prepares them, says to them at one point, focus on the lost sheep of Israel. Go out and gather those lost sheep. Find them and bring them back. At some point, though, at the end of His ministry, He takes the same disciples and He says to them, no longer just focus on Israel, but what does He say to them? Go and baptize all nations in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. And I say this because we can't separate our ability to choose, our freedom, from salvation. I need to be able to choose God, because salvation also has to be made available to me. If I can just choose right and wrong and salvation is not made available to me, my ability to choose means nothing. So in the early church, St. Paul becomes this paramount of the apostles who goes out and becomes the apostle to the Gentiles, baptizing all the nations of the world at that time, baptizing Rome, the Romans, the Greeks, the Hellenes, and bringing them to Christ. They didn't discriminate, did not say, I will only go and find the Jews and make them followers of Christ, but he went and found people in Athens, in Corinth, in Philippi, in Asia Minor, in Cyprus, in Antioch, and brought to them Christ, brought to them the truth, brought to them liberation. We continue on, and the church, as she grows, encounters new people, encounters peoples outside of the empire, of the Holy Roman Empire, the Christian Eastern Empire, and isn't afraid of them. Doesn't say to them, you don't belong You are the other. You stay away. Christ is for us, not for you. In the 9th and 10th centuries, we know that there are missionary activities going on among the Slavs. Saint Cyril and Methodius, the brothers from Thessalonica, go out, are commissioned by the Patriarch of Constantinople to go and to teach the Slavs. At the time, if we imagine the Slavs, the Bulgaria, Serbia, at least what we call that today, teach them about Christ. They go and they actually create an alphabet for them, and they bring Christ to them. In the 10th century, Saint Vladimir, we know Saint Vladimir, he is the king of the Rus, the Russian people in Kiev, and he searches for the truth. He searches for a faith for himself and his people and finds Christianity. And after discovering the glory of the church, the glory of orthodoxy in Constantinople, he also is baptized, and with him his entire people. So we have a period of time when more and more and more people are being baptized, more and more people are being brought to Christ, more and more people being given the opportunity for salvation, the truth, and freedom. Well, you could say, Father, what happens after that? I mean, what about more modern history? And I want to give you a few examples of when the church had the opportunity to preach, teach, and offer salvation to the other, and no longer recognizes them as other, but embraces them as a brother. Okay? In 1872, there was a problem going on. At that time, of course, we're still under Ottoman occupation. But there was a problem in Constantinople with a new heresy that was being introduced in the life of the church. A heresy that tried to divide the church according to ethnicity and according to race. Okay, tried to divide people according to their race, their ethnic background. And so we have in Constantinople a trend. There's a parish that was made up of Bulgarian communicants, Christians, Orthodox Christians from Bulgarian descent. And because they were Bulgarian, the Church of Bulgaria declared that this church belonged to them, that this church within Constantinople was theirs, that they had Bulgarians there, it must be theirs, which led to a council to be held, a Pan-Orthodox Council of 1872 in Constantinople, which declared ethnophilitism, as it has come to be known, as a heresy. It condemned it. And it said that on no terms whatsoever will the church classify people according to race or ethnicity. It cannot do that. That the Eucharist was for everyone. Theo, do you have that?
No.
So there's an article on here. Now if you go to the blog, it's on the bottom. So in 1872 it was condemned, and if you go up top, it says, the fathers of that council said, we censor, condemn, and declare, contrary to the teachings of the Gospels and the sacred canons of the Holy Fathers, the doctrine of philitism, or the difference of races and national diversity in the bosom of the Church of Christ. So in other words, the church right away recognized that dividing our people along these lines can create problems. Okay, so in 1872, it's declared a heresy. 1907, getting closer to Selma. 1907, the Ecumenical Patriarchate, keep going down. 1907, Keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. There you go. There's this man from America, a black Baptist priest, who discovers Constantinople and goes to Constantinople, discovers the truth of Orthodoxy, and he is ordained and sent back to America. He is the first black Orthodox priest of our country, Father Raphael. Who knew about Father Raphael before tonight? You saw the blog post? So you knew about him. That's great. Father Raphael, the Constantinople sees this man, ordains him, sends him back and says to him, go evangelize your people. Go evangelize others in America. And he comes back to America, doesn't succeed in evangelizing the African Americans or the Negroes or his people as they were referred to back then. But again, you see that the church does not create two-category system or class system where they say blacks cannot be ordained, only whites, only Greeks, only this. They see a person who has a calling, they ordain them. Very revolutionary for that time. I mean, today we don't have many black priests in our church. And I was in California this past week, and there was a deacon there, actually Deacon Nathanael. And he's an African American, and he told me he had the opportunity to speak to Martin Luther King at the time. He was alive. And he said that one of the greatest fears that he sees is the segregation of our churches. That more and more our churches are becoming segregated. And that's what Dr. King said at the time, and I would say that we should look at our own churches and congregations and ask ourselves if we're getting comfortable looking just at our own, and own within quotation marks. However you want to define own, whether it's Greek, whether it's white, whether it's American, whether it's, more men, more women, our own, those who are like us. And so, it was interesting because the deacon said, yes, we have to do more to bring others to the truth, not to keep the doors closed. So 1907, Father Raphael is ordained. 1911, what happens in 1911? 1911. In 1911, a man is born. Our future Archbishop. He's born on the island of Ivros, a small little island off the coast of Asia Minor, near Constantinople, under the Ottoman rule still, in 1911. And we'll hear from the Archbishop in one of the videos that we have for you this evening. But he says, he talks about how he felt growing up as a slave. We kind of say, well, how was he a slave? He was white. Or in the 20, where he was considered a slave. He was treated as a slave. He was treated as a second, not even a second, a third-class citizen. And that really was what was inside of him from a young boy. When he came to America as our Archbishop, when Dr. King called him, he remembered what he went through in Ivros, what he endured when he had to, there's a portion of an interview, but it's in Greek, but he talks about being a soldier in the Turkish army and going to vote. It was voting day that day, and being handed a ballot and being told for whom he had to vote, and being told that this is who you vote for, this is what you do, and he had no choice. And he felt bad. He could not determine his future. He could not overcome his own slavery. And so when the same thing was going on here in the United States with the African Americans, and he had the chance to go down and be present, he did. And what we'll hear also is we have found in our archives at the Archdiocese, we think that, oh, this was a great thing and he's a hero. And for all of us, he is a hero. Andrew Young called him his spiritual father. Okay? Dr. King called him his friend. But at the time, he wasn't a hero for everyone. And we have snippets from articles that were written in the newspaper, publicly, in the newspapers. No shame. And letters sent to him, condemning his actions, calling him a traitor. So the Archbishop, when he went down there and he was sure of one thing, that what he was doing was right. What he was doing was consistent with the gospel, was consistent with the love of God at the moment of creation, was consistent with what God said, in the gospel, that there is no greater love than someone to lay down his life for his friend. And he was willing. And he didn't know what he would have discovered down there. I mean, he didn't have security detail. He went down there and he walked next to someone who was considered an agitator, in the South. Walked with him, received phone calls at his hotel room that night, threats. Some of our churches down there stopped supporting the Archdiocese because of this. Okay? So not all of our people, they didn't all see eye to eye. Today, though, we know that what he did was right. And we thank the Lord for his leadership and for his inspiration. I hope and pray that we can all stand up for civil rights, for people's rights, for human rights, human dignity. These are not, and Archbishop Iakovos was clear, this was not a political issue. Civil rights for him was not just merely political. It was part of human decency. It was part of what it means to be a human, to be treated fairly, equally. So he was willing to stand up for that. So today, what are we doing to commemorate Selma? I just want to bring some of the things to your attention. As you know, the local people down in Selma, Alabama, and Montgomery, Birmingham, they're commemorating the 50th anniversary on March 7th and 8th. There will be a large gathering of people down there to reenact the march, or a portion of the march, the crossing of that bridge from Selma into Montgomery. That will take place on the 8th, Sunday the 8th. There will be a number of Ahepins down there. There will be a number of our people beyond the Ahepins, but including Ahepins from the parishes, the parish of Montgomery there. And we're hoping to have the Archbishop go down there and lead our community in this reenactment. On March 12th, Father Varlamos, who can speak about this for days upon days and answer all of your questions in detail, he is coming to speak at our cathedral in New York City on March 12th, Thursday, between 6 p.m. and 8 p.m. He'll be there. We're going to try to record it, so for those who can't make it, we'll have it available online for you all to watch. And he will give us the details. He'll give us, what went on behind the scenes. On March 26th, the Archdiocese is co-sponsoring an event at the United Nations, along with the permanent mission of the U.S. and the permanent observer mission of the EU. So the three of us, the U.S., the EU, and our Archdiocese, are co-sponsoring an event to commemorate Selma. We're going to bring speakers, including Archbishop Demetrius, speakers who have some connection, either because they were there and are still alive, or are a successor or a family member of someone who marched. And we will relive, in essence, Selma through their presence. That is an open event. Okay? All of these things are open events. I mean, if you can get to Selma, that's great. But the event on the 12th you can attend at the cathedral. The event at the United Nations, you would have to register. All of this information is on our new website. You can register online and come and attend the talk the panel discussion at the United Nations. And finally, this website will not go away. So this website now has been, well, it's not there, but there's a website that's been developed. It will look a little different in a few days, but so if you go to human rights, so we've collected all of the material that we have in our archives, new material. We have material from AHEPA. We have different materials from different sources highlighting our community's role in civil rights. Now it's up as a kind of a website commemorating the 50th anniversary of Selma. But after the event is done, after everyone is done celebrating Selma, this website will continue to collect information and documents and resources for orthodoxy and human rights. So it'll be our human rights subsection of my department's website. So as we do anything in the area of civil and human rights, we will put them up on this website. It will be available to you as a teaching tool, and so forth. So with that, I'll turn it over to Teo. Are you next? You're next. So I thank you for your attention, and more will come out if you have questions in the Q&A, but I wanted just to give you kind of this overall history of the principles behind our participation in the civil rights movement. So thank you very much.
Father, thank you very much. I don't think it can be emphasized enough the intense work and research that Father Nathanael has done and the individuals that he's brought together. Because when we think about the commemoration of an event that symbolized so powerfully through that Life magazine cover, it's really an iconic cover. It was really the culmination of 2,000 years of the ethos of our church, and it's really been brought together so beautifully by what Father Nathanael has spearheaded through the office, by bringing scholars together from around the country, delving into the archives. I think what is appropriate, what we talked about, was to give you all just a brief overview from Archbishop Iacobos in his own words.
Unlike you and most of you, I was not born in the United States to live and enjoy democracy. I came to the United States from Turkey, where I was a third category citizen. So when Martin Luther King Jr. had his walk to the courthouse of Symeonides, I decided to join him. So I said, this is my time to take revenge against all those who oppress people. Upon my return, someone told me, Prodoti, traitor. Somehow that I should be ashamed of what I have done. Some that I am not an American. Some that I'm not a Christian. I know that civil rights and human rights continue to be the most thorny social issues in our nation. But I will stand for both rights, civil and human, as long as I live. I feel the Christian duty and the duty of a man who was born as a slave.
Every time I watch that video, I get chills, and the hairs on my arms stand on end. And, when I started working for the Archdiocese some 20-odd years ago, my class in the seminary was the last class under Archbishop Iacobos. And I was there for the last few years of his ministry. And the one thing that I can tell you firsthand was that this was not an opportunist. This was not somebody who saw an opportunity to capture the spotlight, because his father Nathanael said the climate in which that took place was a hostile climate. And up until his final year in office, the one thing that Archbishop Iakovos said to us our final year at seminary, he says, all of you are soldiers for Christ. And he admonished us in a fatherly, paternal, loving way to go and march together. It became an interesting reflection on that comment when just 2 years later I had the wonderful privilege and opportunity to be part of the first official U.S. visit of His All Holiness Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew to the United States. So it was a 1-month visit that culminated in His All Holiness receiving the Congressional Gold Medal. For those of you who don't know, it's the single highest honor that can be given by the Congress of the United States. It was bestowed upon His All Holiness unanimously. And we went to 16 cities in 30 days. And one of those stops was specifically to the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial, where His All Holiness laid a wreath. And he laid a wreath there because His All Holiness knew that this was part of the legacy of Orthodoxy. This was a place that needed to be visited, a place where a statement needed to be made, where this was not just, again, a single moment in history, but a place where the church needed to continue to have a voice and to speak. So, for years afterwards, Archbishop Iakovos, and indeed the Archdiocese, had a very, very close relationship with Martin Luther King's wife, Coretta Scott King. And she was gracious to appear in this video dedication to Archbishop Iakovos. And it's interesting when you hear and notice her words of how important it was for Archbishop Iakovos to be there in Selma, Alabama.
Martin called on the religious leaders that he felt were respected throughout America. Those who were respected and had great influence could influence others. And certainly, Archbishop Iakovos was one of the most respected throughout our nation and certainly around the world. And if he participated, if he could submit himself to the dangers of the struggle, then this must be an important struggle. It elevated the struggle, and certainly I think it showed the nobility of the man as well.
We had the opportunity, just to close this quickly so we can sort of see some context. Most people, again, are not aware the single largest repository of the Hellenic American and Orthodox Christian experience in the United States is the archives of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America. We have more material historically at the Archdiocese than any other entity or organization. Scholars from all over the world, professors, academicians, sociologists, travel to the Archdiocese to see and research the historical events and the historical documents contained therein. And I want to show you just a couple of documents here. Number one, 1958. Theological students from the University of Chicago wrote to the Archdiocese to inquire about issues of school integration, to inquire about the position of the total racial problem to the United States, statistical information of the progress of integration, etc., etc. In other words, students from across the country sought the voice and opinion of the Archdiocese, and the Archdiocese responded. And it's amazing to see, from 1958 even earlier, an unwavering, consistent perspective of the Church on these social and moral issues. I'll get to that in a second. Archbishop Iakovos wrote to all of the clergy and to the laity in the Archdiocese. after the Civil Rights Act, the Civil Rights Law here, that provided equal rights. And Archbishop Iakovos championed this cause throughout the Archdiocese. We have a whole folder of letters written against His Eminence after individuals saw him on the cover of Life magazine, after they saw photographs of him appearing next to Martin Luther King in Selma, Alabama. I was very disappointed to see you in the newspaper making headlines for going over to help the Negroes in the South. Have you considered helping the churches in Philadelphia unite? Frankly, I'd never like to have any Negroes around my house or in the Greek Orthodox church or school. Have you ever considered intermarriage? A Greek and a Mavri? Well, there's something for you to consider to think about. It's amazing when you consider how flippant and disrespectful individuals were to the highest ranking religious leader. It was with astonishment we saw you on the cover of Life magazine. Respectfully, we submit that Archbishop Iakovos debased his position. All of these are documents scanned and preserved by the archives of the Archdiocese that show the different opinions that were sent in. We have all these con letters written against the Archbishop. And it's amazing because it's not just individuals. They were sent by telegram. They were written by parish council presidents. They were written in Greek, in English. They were written by churches against the Archbishop. Entire parish councils took resolutions against the Archbishop and against the Archdiocese. So when we start to think about what the climate was like, and there you go, all the signatures, writing against the Archbishop for what he had done. So when Archbishop Iakovos talks about the fact that he was called a traitor, all of that material has been preserved in very stark and real and raw ways by the archives of the Archdiocese. But it's not just the cons, but also many letters of pro as well, where individuals from around the country praised the Archbishop for what he had done. And the Archbishop responded. He said, "I received your recent communication. He said, I went to Selma as a solemn duty before God and country in the noble cause of equality for all. This is the essence of our Christianity, behind which we cannot shield ourselves with righteousness. The issue is simple. We cannot be Christian in name and not in spirit and action. If our most prized possession is merely the respectability of Christianity, then we bring to it nothing but disrepute and dishonor. Christianity is not a jewel for safekeeping. It's a living thing which struggles with the challenge of evil, rejoices spiritually when evil is overcome, and dies when the challenge remains unmet and evil triumphs." It's amazing to see his hand author some of these documents and some of these responses. And just finally, a few other things to be sensitive to time. When Martin Luther King was shot and killed, Archbishop Iakovos immediately wrote this intensely beautiful letter to Coretta Scott King. And they remained dear, dear friends throughout their lives. All of this has just been incredibly preserved in the archives. So again, simply to highlight that this was not just something that was viewed as a moment, but something that became a living legacy throughout. And again, I highlighted that document earlier. So, I think you get the idea, because I can go on and on and on to get over to Father Peter. Okay, Father Nathanael wants me to highlight to you all one other document, and I will in addition to this one. This was not just the person of the Archbishop, but the person of the Archbishop moved the Archdiocese. In 1988, the entire Clergy Laity Congress made a resolution on political and racial justice throughout the world. This was not just something 1950. This was not just something 1960. This was not something 1970, but something that the Church as a whole, under the leadership of His Eminence Archbishop Iakovos, viewed as a priority. So when the Church as a whole and as a body gathered together, we made statements together on these issues and called it upon our moral obligation to speak as such. So Father Nathanael wants me to highlight one other document, and he's going to tell me where to go, actually.
You go to statements.
Okay.
It's on the website. People can find it.
He knows better than I do at this point. So where am I going?
Go to statements, Orthodox statements. I think it's the first one.
Is this one?
Yes.
Why don't you narrow it?
Well, so there are a number of statements that are in our archives. We selected the best ones, or the ones that kind of summarize the Church's position in the best way. And this one is really important because it is the official statement on racial justice or racial equality. I won't read it, but I just think it's definitely one of the documents that everyone should read, because again, it was written at a time, and this is such visionary writing. I mean, it's incredible to think that our people, our church, were saying things back then that people can't say today, are unable to say today. What's that? Or unwilling to say it. Exactly. Or unwilling. Well, they can't say it because you're not willing. Exactly. But I mean, incredible. 1963, before Selma, what our position was. So again, it wasn't that he found, Archbishop Iakovos found an opportunity in Selma. This was something he was saying, and we were saying as a church prior to the march in Selma. So it's important because it's before the 65 event, and it kind of shows that the church has been consistent throughout its history.
So without further ado, I want to kick this over to Father Peter so he can also have an opportunity to share some insights and thoughts.
Just not to repeat some of the fine comments that were made by Father Nathanael and Matteo. As Archbishop Iakovos' ministry was coming to a close in 1996, one of our last stops before his retirement was to a community in Brooklyn. And it was during this stop that one of the young adults who was very active in that ministry at the time had traveled for business and had ran across a colleague in the South, who upon continuing the discussion was there present at Selma, Alabama, where he was sent by his university to cover the march and the activities that were going on by his school newspaper. And so they had this long conversation, and actually the community said, gee, we are preparing to host His Eminence during one of these last pastoral visits that he will have to community. Could we ask you, could we pay for you to come to be present there to make a small presentation or to be part of the presentation? He goes, you're not paying nothing. He goes, I will come if I have to walk to be able to come to pay my respect. You have no idea what the Archbishop's presence meant to us. And he said, and by referring to us, he was saying not just me as a person, he goes, to us as a people. To be able to see his presence there meant and gave us inner strength to be able to realize that we were on the right path, that we were not alone, that there were people there who were willing to step forward and to be there to support us through prayer and through their presence. And really, he gave one of the most remarkable talks that evening to a packed community, which was then translated into Greek by another person and then said again as well. And it was really quite touching and quite beautiful. We're going to open things up now to different questions that you may have. As we are recording this to place this on the website, there's a microphone set up over there. Everyone, if they have a question or a comment that they would like to make, if you could stand either in line or speak into the microphone so that we make sure that your comments and the responses get recorded, it would be greatly appreciated.
Thank you, Father Peter, Father Nathanael, and Tail. Those are really a watershed moment for us to hear your observations. And, this wasn't prepared, but I have an anecdote that's very similar to Father Peter's, and I thought I would share it because it's something that has always touched me. Sometimes we see an event, and I remember as a young boy seeing this magazine and feeling that that this sort of as a Greek American in Ansonia, greatly outnumbered, I felt we were relevant when I saw this. But sometimes you really go to appreciate something by seeing it through someone else's eyes. Father Peter will recall that when the Archbishop Iakovos Library was dedicated in Brookline, I would say about 15 years ago, Father Peter, and it was a beautiful day. A number of parishioners went up there. Archbishop Iakovos, of course, had passed away. President Bush came from Kennebunkport because he was personally friends with Archbishop Iakovos. And it was my first time to be on the campus. It was beautiful, and the library opened up, and there was all this beautiful memorabilia there. It's a great asset for anyone who has not been there. And there were festivities, there were speeches. I remember very fondly John Peter was running around, and my two daughters were chasing him, and it was just a beautiful day that I'll always have imprinted in my mind. And if you bear with me, I'm getting to my story. So after the festivities, the speeches, people were free to roam around the library, and there's a museum there with many artifacts and memorabilia of Archbishop Iakovos. And this there was a poster of the Life magazine cover. And of course, when you talk about diversity, everyone looked Greek and everyone looked like the color of my skin. And I noticed a lady of color, a African-American lady that was maybe 65 or 70 years old. And she was by herself. And she was walking around, and I went up and introduced myself to her. And obviously I was curious as to why she was there, and I asked her. And she told me that that was on a Sunday. I'm sorry, I think it was a Sunday, Father Peter. Maybe it was a Saturday. And she remarked that she was from Brooklyn, and that she had marched in Selma as a young girl in her 20s, and got a chance to hold hands with His Eminence during the march. And it always stuck with her about what a man of peace and God he was. And she indicates that the night before she was listening on the radio and somehow heard that the following morning there was going to be this commemoration of the opening of Archbishop Iakovos Library in Brookline, Mass. And this lady went and got on the bus at 5 o'clock in the morning in Brooklyn and came all the way to Boston by herself. And I said, wow, that's amazing. And she said, it wasn't amazing. He came down to Selma and marched with me. And I just thought that with all the tributes, that in a small way, that was an awesome tribute to what Archbishop Iakovos meant to the African American, to the Black community. I wanted to share that with you.
I want to thank everybody for this very moving presentation. I didn't grow up here. Supposedly I shouldn't be affected, but I am in very strange and unexpected ways. Not only because this is something that personally also makes me very proud, but in many ways it also reminds me of what's going on today in Greece and what the challenges that we're still facing, and how this can be used as a kind of inspiration to even motivate us and mobilize us today. My simple question is this available online? So it's available, you don't have to go to the Archdiocese.
As of 4 hours ago.
Okay, this is great. So if you could just send me, I can disseminate it to my fellow Greek scholars here in the US. As a non-American, I'm still on a visa even after 30 years. I remember that my most moving experience in this country is visiting the museums of the two kings, Elvis and then Martin Luther King. And of course the Elvis was a circus, it was a charade of kitsch America, as much as I liked his music. And then we went to the Martin Luther King Museum where they make you walk through the motel where there are representations of the civil rights movement, and you end up walking into the room and out onto the balcony where he was shot. And I think it was the first time I cried in the museum. My other point is that nearly 10 years ago when Greece was organizing the Olympics in 2004, I was also confronted by my own sort of unconscious racism that we all carry with us in various ways that we're not aware of. There was a young woman on television who looked African American, spoke impeccable and fluent Greek. She is the offspring of an African and a Greek woman, grew up in Greece. She is fortunate to be considered Greek because of her mother. But many children that are born in Greece are still today considered foreign, without a passport, without a country to call their own. A lot of these children are children of color, either from Asia or from Africa. And I think this is a great opportunity to kind of bring this moment in history, which may seem too far away, but still very pertinent today. Perhaps a walk in Athens might be due soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's interesting that Teo referred to this photograph as an iconic photograph. And at that moment, I'm looking at it, and the way it's set on the pedestal, the way it's framed, it reminds me of an icon. It reminds me of the Sunday of Orthodoxy and the children marching around the church. And Father Nathanael talking about in the image of God. And there is holiness in that picture. There's righteousness in that picture. And those words, like, it's iconic, it finally struck me. It is an icon. It is an icon for us, how to live our lives. And I want to thank you all again for that presentation. I want to thank you all for coming here tonight.
Thank you. I have a question for those who have researched the events. Did other religious leaders answer the call for the march on Selma?
Yeah. Yes. There were several religious leaders, none as high as in stature and in a position as Archbishop Iakovos. One of the individuals who will speak at the UN is a nun, Catholic nun, who tried to go down in March, but was forbidden by her bishop. And so she instead went and served in one of the hospitals. So on Bloody Sunday, when the one attempt to cross into Montgomery, when the marchers were beat up, she was able to participate in essence by helping to heal those who were injured. But there were leaders from the Jewish community, various Christian denominations as well. Reverend Reeves was, I believe, a Unitarian who came down from Boston as well. But his Archbishop Iakovos was the highest ranking religious leader, higher than Martin Luther King. And Martin Luther King was the leader of the march, but Archbishop Iakovos was the highest ranking religious leader. But there were other individuals who represented their own either denomination, congregation, or synagogue for that matter. And you can get more of those details probably from Father Barlamos and by visiting, the Civil Rights Museum online. They have that kind of information in terms of who else was there, what other religious leaders, if any.
You actually bring up a point. This is sort of my question to Father Nathanael. When we were looking through some of the documents in the archives, one of the attacks on Archbishop Iakovos that was made was the fact that he marched, or rather that he stood with Martin Luther King as Archbishop of America. And in the letters that are in the archives, it says other people marched as individuals. You shamed us by marching as Archbishop of, at that time, North and South America. So he brought both continents of the United States into this issue through his person, because he refused to make it, I'm marching as a person, but he said, I'm making a statement of the entire Orthodox Christian Church, or the Greek Orthodox Church.
I just have a comment. Father Peter, I think this is from your office?
Yes.
Okay, I remember the first time I ever saw this when I was a little girl, when you had just come here. And I remember my first reaction being surprise. I just wasn't expecting to see Archbishop Iakovos with Martin Luther King. And the second feeling was just really intense pride that I kind of didn't see coming. And I remember asking my dad about it later on. And something that really moves me now is that living currently in a culture that I feel like religion is sometimes persecuted today, this still gives me great pride, and I hold our faith in very high esteem anyway for being so faithful to tradition, and then having images like this and memories like this really reinforces that for me. It really shines a light on what I find unique and truly beautiful about our faith and our church's history in general.
I would like to share an experience with you. Many years ago, when I first got on the parish council back in 1972, some of you remember St. Barbara's in the back of the church. And the parish council would be in the back of the church. And occasionally on a Sunday, because of our location, once in a while, it was a great while, but probably every 3 to 6 months, we would get some of the local people come into church and stand in the back of the church. So I was one of the younger members on the parish council, and one of the older members, I think it was George Mitchell, would come to me and say, George, see what they're doing here, because they'd be standing in the back of the church and be causing a little bit of confusion. So one Sunday I come into church, and sure enough there was a black gentleman standing in the back of the church, and George had come up to me and said, George, can you see what that person wants in the church? So I walked up to him and I said, welcome to St. Barbara's, can I help you? Figuring that if it was a problem I would ask them to leave if they were feeling under the weather. And when I walked up to him and said, welcome to St. Barbara's, can I help you? This gentleman turned around and in eloquent Greek answered me. Well, many of you know I don't speak Greek, I understand it, but this gentleman was not just talking in Greek, it was in eloquent Greek that he addressed me. And at this point I had to turn to my parish council members and say, well, now I need your help. And come to find out, he was an Ethiopian student at the Divinity School at Yale that had come to church for the first time. So I've learned that when you see somebody new, say, welcome to St. Barbara, may I help you? And leave it at that. And thank you for sharing that experience with you.
I had the good luck to meet with Archbishop Iakovos near the end of his life, I think. Father Peter, you were his archdeacon, weren't you? Yes, I do remember that. I met him as a parish council president at the time for business reasons. My question is,
in addition to Archbishop's public statements and interviews and person-to-person exchange of ideas with a number of people, did he ever leave, are there any private thoughts of his that have been left among his documents? Did he reflect on the issues of before and after the events and so on? Were there any reflections at all that you found among the archives?
We can repeat the
Well,
question.
they're not, I mean,
Repeat the question.
so the question is whether or not there are some private documents in the archives of the Archbishop, his reflections, maybe a diary or a journal. Is that correct? Is that?
That's correct, yes.
So Teo mentioned that there is that book, Ego Iacovos or I Iacovos, that was published in Greek and English, that kind of looks at the history of various significant moments in the Archbishop's ministry. What is it, chapter 7? Chapter 7 in that book is dedicated to Selma, but it's public. I mean, it's not private. I'm not sure, I don't know, that would be a question for Nikki, if he has journals that have not been released. You know, I don't know of any, and neither does Father Peter, and he would know where they were hidden or. But I think, you know, in general, Archbishop Iacovos was a very open person, and I don't think that it would be in his nature to say, release these after 30 years of my death or something like that. I think he would say, I'm an open book, here's who I am, rather than hide things, yeah, especially for this.
Yeah, actually, you wouldn't know this, but that is verbatim. The reason why most people won't know this, we even have an archives of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese, is because it was the initiative of the personal secretary, personal assistant of Archbishop Iacovos, Nikki Talet, who we also wanted to try to bring here. And I've had the opportunity to work with Nikki. The Niarchos Foundation and Leadership 100 have basically funded the digitization of most of the archives of the Archdiocese. We're not done yet, but it's been a multi-million-dollar endeavor. And the only reason why we have these documents, we haven't lost them, is because we've gone through a digitization process. But my point is, one thing Nikki would say to me is when she showed Archbishop Iacovos what she had started with the archives, she's always told me his character would be, this is to the archives. No matter how sensitive, no matter how positive, no matter how negative, no matter whatever it is, she said this is something that is for history and for posterity. So to his point is absolutely, there was nothing in terms of my interaction, I've had plenty, probably more than any other staff member at the Archdiocese than Nikki, to say yes, he was very open. What you see here is public and private, and there weren't two sides or anything like that to the issue or to the man.
And I would just reiterate that, saying what you saw in public was what you saw in private. Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone, for coming. The website that you see stated behind us right here at blogs.goarch.org is where you can find some of the information that was referred to this evening. We thank Father Nathanael for coming up, for Teo, and for AHEPA for sponsoring this latest mustard seed faith group for adults. On your way out, you can certainly help yourself to some snacks. No one's leaving, so if you have any other questions that you didn't feel comfortable asking in public, but would like to ask in private, you certainly may. And there are flyers here in the front for the next Mustard Seed Faith Group for Adults, which will take place on Wednesday evening, April 1st. It will be exploring the celebration of Great and Holy Week in the Orthodox Church. We're looking into that with a little bit more great detail, and hopefully everyone will be able to join us on April 1st, beginning at 7 o'clock p.m. So thank you, have a wonderful night, and God bless you. Thank you so much for coming.